Athletes, take note. Check out this autopsy. We're looking at the chest cavity. We're looking at the abdominal cavity, and all that yellow stuff, that's the lungs. All that yellow stuff is visceral fat. That's a bit of the liver. You can see it's got a yellow tinge. That's fatty liver or hepatosteatosis. And he's grabbing bits of the omentum there. And you can see some loops of bowel. And you can see all of that yellow stuff is visceral fat. That is not meant to be there. Visceral fat. Now, what determines visceral fat? I'll tell you. It is determined by insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity. If you're insulin sensitive, you don't store visceral fat. And why is that important? Because what determines insulin sensitivity? How much carbohydrates you eat. Here's a coronal section, visceral fat versus no visceral fat. Here's an MRI scan. Very similar amounts of subcutaneous fat, but hugely different amounts of visceral fat. Here's a sumo wrestler image, okay? Very large human, high calorie intake, 10,000 calories a day, some of them, but very low carbohydrate consumption, huge amounts of subcutaneous fat, perfectly healthy, no visceral fat. Here's an MRI scan, very little subcutaneous fat, a carb loading person, athlete with high amounts of visceral fat versus one that doesn't carb load, no visceral fat. And here's a research study in athletes that talks about insulin resistance and what happens to them and what they're at risk of. And the conclusions are that they are at increased risk of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and the associated chronic diseases that go along with insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and gaining weight in the abdomen, in the viscera. So subcutaneous fat is absolutely fine if you happen to eat a lot of calories, but visceral fat is not, and there are many athletes with high levels of visceral fat. They may have a six-pack, but the only way you're going to know is if you actually do a scan of their abdomen.